Everyone, one of the cool things going on in gaming right now is the one-on-one game where you have one game master and one player. It's kind of cool. There's a lot of benefits of it, but there's some challenges. And there's some challenges when using Savage Worlds. So let's talk about some solutions.
It's a savage world. Strangers are with war. It's a savage
Hey everyone, it's Carl with Tabletop Tango. Look at the bubbles, do the stuff. We'd love your support. We'd love your email. Hey, listening to this video, if you've got some thoughts and ideas, put them in the comments. I think we all can learn together. And you can also check out our podcast at Mastering the RPG, which is more general topics, but still fun nonetheless. So what do I want to talk about today? I want to talk about the phenomenon of kind of one-on-one gaming where you have just a game master and a single player. I'm not going to go into all the details as why it's cool or why you might want to do it, but there are some things that I thought I might mention up front. It gives a lot of chance for spotlight. You've got one player, it can focus on their backstory, on their story. Some games are just better that way when you've got like the rogue who's on secret missions. It's kind of weird to have a big party. So there's a lot of interesting things you can do, but there's also some challenges because most game systems, and let's be honest, kind of Savage Worlds as well, are more geared towards parties, a group of people trying to accomplish a goal. So when we talk about one-on-one, things can be a little different. So like I said, if you've got ideas, put them in the comments so that we all can learn together. But I want to take some time of the thoughts. I was bouncing it around. I haven't done much one-on-one gaming, primarily have been doing, I did some small groups where it was just two players and it's kind of a buddy cop thing. I've done one-on-one when we're doing like kind of extra scenes, setting the players up and that sort of thing. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm really talking about a campaign. Multiple games, not just sort of a one-on-one session to set something up for the overall campaign. So what are some of the challenges? Well, first, the obvious one is sort of the skills and the resolution of things when you're exploring. So most times when you're talking about a party, there's kind of niches that people fill. They might be able to sort of expand a little bit. D&D's, really that's all about D&D, right? You've got the different classes that all come together to kind of solve a problem. They each have their specialty. Now, Savage Worlds can help with that problem in the sense that the way character creation works is you have skill points that you can spend. And so a game master, you could give more skill points to your single player so that they can spend some time being a little more diverse in what they can do. So they can have the healing skill, even though they're a shooter or a heavy warrior, whatever. They can bring in other aspects. In a cyberpunk game, they can have great fighting skills, but also some hacking, also some heavy electronics, so that they can do more than one thing that you typically have different specialties doing. So character creation in Savage Worlds lends itself to these challenges that you might have in a one-on-one game. What's other challenges? Well, let's talk combat. That's a big one, right? Combat is really the thing that kind of defines the difficulty, I think, in when you're doing solo gaming. Solo gaming, when you're talking about role-playing and social constructs, it actually works out probably pretty good, right? Because you can do a lot of role-playing, you can use those social skills, and hopefully in the character creation you created some. But in combat, that's all in brawl, and unless every fight is just you against some other foe, it can be pretty intense. So some of the things that we talk about in Savage Worlds is like the initiative system. So in an initiative system, each group of bad guys and each individual wild card gets a card. So if you're an individual and you're a single wild card, you're only getting one card around. And some part of the part of the initiative strategy is to try to get as many cards as you can, so that Joker might come up for your side. You now have the ability to, the folks are spread across the turn, so some can go on hold, plan for your action, and so it really works out great with a party dynamic. If you're just an individual, you have one card. And so you've got to be careful when you're bringing the bad guys to bear. You want to make sure that you don't overpower the player with the fact that, let's say you have a couple of groups or a couple of bad guys, and suddenly each one of them has an action card versus the player's single action card. So what are some of the things we can do? Well, obviously we can have all the bad guys go on one action card, and then it's sort of one versus one. But I think you also might be able to let the players maybe start with a single edge like level-headed or quick or something like that, where that can give them a little bit of advantage of having multiple cards dealt with them that they can work through. You can also allow the players, when they're using their extras, which, let's be honest, in a solo game, they're probably going to want to pull in some hirelings, henchmen to help them out. You can now get past the normal where typically on the wild cards card is when their extras would go. Well, you can split them out and have the extras have their own card and the player have their own card. And so now you're starting to get a little bit of that economy. So that's some of the things you can do from the basic initiative in combat to maybe help with some of the challenges you'd have. Also, the other side of it is the action economy. So remember, in Savage Worlds, each individual can go up to have three actions with the multi-action penalty. And if you do have a lot of bad guys going against this player, and when I say bad guys, I mean kind of the mooks. You know, even if you've got a couple of mooks, a couple of extras against a player, they could still get that hit in if they've got, you know, more chances to hit than the player characters. Typically, when players are working together, they're singling out, they're working through a group, they're planning their strategy, and it helps kind of clear the room so that they can go after the main antagonist in the scene or accomplish the goal they're trying to get done. So now, as an individual, just yourself, you really only have one attack around if you don't want to have the multi-action penalty. Versus your opponents, you could have multiples that are going against you at a time. And so they're getting gang up bonus easily. They're getting the advantages of the rules that they can take advantage of. So what are some of the things we can do to maybe help with that a little bit? I would propose maybe getting rid of the multi-action penalty for player characters if they're doing certain things. Like you might say if you can do a test and a attack in the same round without multi-action penalty. You can make it easier for them to be kind of a two-gun kid by maybe getting rid of the ambidextrous or the offhand penalty by letting them be a big hero. And so, yeah, they can use two weapons, no problem. So there's some things that can get them more attacks in a round to make up for the fact that there may be other additional mooks. Now, I treated this when I was talking about it as there's multiple folks or opponents that they have to worry about and they have to slog through. Obviously, one of the things you can do is minimize the number of individuals they have to go against. But I'm not a big, balance person. I think Savage Worlds is hard to balance. So make your scenarios interesting and have things work the way they're supposed to work. You're going into an enemy base. There's going to be multiple enemies. There's going to be multiple lieutenants you have to get through. So simplifying that and just having one opponent they go against at a time, it's going to feel lacking, I think. And so it's better to give the players a little bit of an edge, but have them still go against what makes sense in the scenario. So that's just my opinion on it. Now, another thing is wildcards are, bad guy wildcards and the player wildcards are pretty evenly matched. There's not this idea of you can, necessarily nerf a wild card that is the opponent. They still have their bennies, although they have fewer. They still have their ability to soak. They still have the wild die. So it doesn't make sense, or you could say it makes sense, but it's much harder to do that mano-y-mano. So the player's going one-on-one against this wild card where you're used to having multiple players be able to maybe come up with strategies and, formulate attacks and that sort of thing. So just sort of that, now it becomes basically a shootout, to see who gets the most wounds first and gets that explosion first. So some of my thoughts on that is maybe the wild card bad guys aren't as tough. Maybe they are just resilient, and have that one wound or maybe just two wounds. Have the lieutenants that you're going against, maybe they're wild cards, but they only have one wound. And so there's easier for the player to overcome those challenges, though it's still challenging. It's not just wiping the floor with extras. So those were some of the thoughts I had on the combat side of it. One of the things that I'll bring out from the Adventure Toolkit that I really, really like is dramatic tasks. I love dramatic tasks. If you've listened to any of these videos or you've watched when Eric and I are together, we love dramatic tasks. Now, there's a problem with dramatic tasks when you're talking about one-on-one gaming, a single player. The rules really drive home, pick the number of tokens based on the number of players that are working through the dramatic task, and then roll up the difficulty based on that. Well, without multiple players, you don't have the chance for support. You don't have a chance for one of the other players to get some raises to make up for your failure that you might have had when you're doing it. You're pretty much on your own. If you miss, you're behind. Now you're behind, absolutely. And the only way you can get back to it is if you get a big roll the next time. So dramatic tasks, that makes hard for a dramatic task to work out, I think, for a player, unless you make them too easy and it's really less than one per turn. And then it's like, well, I got to get a couple successes, and that's kind of boring a little bit. So I think what I would do, and I haven't done this, but one of the things that might be interesting is to, focus on the hardness the way it's supposed to be, but without players picking up slack, use fewer penalties, get bonuses for the player being smart on how they're doing it, so that works in like there's support. So the player comes up with a creative way that they're using this skill, and you say that's super creative, I'm going to give you a bonus. You may do that anyway in your normal games, but it's super important, I think, when they don't have the chance to have other players supporting them or other players picking up the slack. So be careful when you're using dramatic tasks that you don't make them impossible for the player to overcome a couple of misses early on. A couple of failures, and now they're so far behind the 8 ball, they simply would need to have 2 raises to even get close, and that's no fun, right? So what are some other things that might be interesting to help with the struggle of a single player in the campaign? So there's a couple of setting rules I think might be good to consider. First is obviously wound cap. Maybe make it a little more difficult for all those mooks to just like swallow up the player. Might also think about heroes never die, because there's no reason it needs to be deadly. It could be just a lot of fun, and players knocked out, pushed back. His Batman character somehow still gets away, but the bad guys just happen to win, so it doesn't have to be that deadly. You can throw in creative combat for the player side, so that when something happens, they get a little, and they do hit, they can get a little bonus. So there's a lot of interesting things you can do, maybe using some of the setting rules. You can start the players off at season, so that that player has more edges and things that they can bring to the table. You can use Born a Hero, where they get to maybe pick one major one, no matter what, and that's a good chance for them to pick Level-Headed or something like that. So what other things are interesting? And I just had to throw a couple notes at the end. So I mentioned make sure you give them chance to have NPC helpers, extras. Don't turn them into GM PCs, but allow the player to maybe have those henchmen. It's classic in the original D&D that you needed a bunch of henchmen to go in a dungeon because they were going to take the brunt of things going wrong. Focus on maybe more intrigue, less combat, so you don't have to worry about that balance. Obviously, there's a lot of chance for role-playing, and so that's pretty cool. Don't overburden the player. Just bury them in bad guys. I'm talking a little bit out of two sides of my mouth, because I also say don't hold punches, because you want the scenario to feel like the scenario. It's a balance. It's a balance. I mentioned make the foes a little weaker, but still challenging with things like resilient versus full wild card. So lots of things you can do. There's challenges with every game system. Some game systems are designed for solo one-on-one play, and Savage Worlds not necessarily, but there's some things we can do to maybe tweak house rule a little bit, as you might say, to make solo gaming with a single GM player fun. Just some of my ideas in the comments. Put yours, things that you would do to make that work out better and be more fun for the player, and add challenge, but not too much challenge. So again, I'm Carl with Tabletop Tango. Look at the bubbles, do the stuff. Check out our podcast, Mastering the RPG. We'd love your support. We'd love your feedback. And we will catch you next time. Thanks.
It's a savage world. Strangers a weird war. It's a savage world. classics to explore. It's a savage world in the land of the dead.